Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the One Deeper podcast. Today we're talking about something we all love and need, food, but with a twist. We're looking at it through the lens of our senses, our evolutionary history, and the role our environment has on our food choices. Joining us is Rachelle de Vries, a postdoctoral researcher at Tilburg University who knows a thing or two about how our food choices are influenced by more than just hunger. We're going to talk about how everything from the smell of a pie to the way food is presented can sway our decisions. It's not just about what's on our plates, it's about the whole sensory experience surrounding it. So please enjoy this conversation with Dr. Rachelle de Vries.
How have you been doing?
Good. We're recording right now.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay,
that's
great.
It's good. Yeah, I've been good. It's good to see you. And thank
Thanks
you.
for having me.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for do this. Because this is where I do a lot of AI cognitive science stuff, right? But I haven't had a chance to because this is something like the field, like the kind of things you're studying, stuff that I'm interested in. But it's not like my professional thing. So
Yeah.
I haven't had a chance to sort of bring them together.
Yeah.
So I'm very curious as to how you think about this stuff and
Yeah, sure.
in terms of
I'm ready to
technology.
answer whatever questions. I
Well,
mean, yeah.
I want to talk about the one study, the spatial memory one,
Yeah.
which is pretty interesting. But how did you get involved in this? First of all, no one knows what we're talking about.
Who are you?
Who are you? So
Yeah.
what exactly are we talking about here? In terms of the study I just mentioned and your research.
Yeah, so maybe indeed a bit of context about
Yeah.
me. So I'm a postdoc at Tilburg University, Department of Communication and Cognition. And before this, I completed my doctoral research. So I got my PhD in Wageningen in the area of eating behavior and sensory science. So sensory science is really about how you perceive the world through your senses, always in relation to food, obviously, because food is really... I guess food is my cup of tea.
Nice.
And yeah, just eating behavior, just kind of detangling why people eat or choose to eat what they eat. That really fascinates me. So my entire sort of work trajectory, research trajectory is really centered around that question, I would say.
Nice.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you have this technology, very interesting technology integration into trying to solve, help some of these problems with VR. How are you, how does that play in?
Yeah, so this VR tool, we're going to develop that early next year. So it's really an integration, I would say, of the sensory sciences, eating behavior. So we're trying to incorporate the sense of olfaction or smell into a VR environment. And in order to be able to really simulate a naturalistic or highly realistic food environment, right? So these are environments in which we typically make food decisions, like a supermarket. And if we manage to do that and we can develop this infrastructure, we can perhaps use it as a research tool to really study people's food decision-making processes in a highly naturalistic and non-invasive way. So it's really a tool to better understand, I would say, the fundamental mechanisms driving our food choices.
That's interesting. I never thought of what Albert Heijn smells like. But I do. There's this one interesting anecdote. So back home, I used to live in this apartment building that was it faced the ocean, but it was downwind from a bakery, right? And that was the best worst situation. It's amazing because every morning it smells so good, but every morning it's holy shit, it smells so good.
Yeah.
It was that was an interesting experience.
It's funny that you mentioned that because this is the stereotypical example given to people when they talk, when they're asked to imagine the influence of smell on their eating behavior. A bakery is the prime example of that. Yeah. And oftentimes, I guess I can ask you the question, what were the thoughts, or did you notice anything about your thoughts or your feelings at that moment?
Whenever it happens, it's for me, it was more than wanting to eat. It was because I associate the smell of bread with comfort and security and feeling just being taken care of, because that's usually what my mom would give me when I'm sick, or when I'm had a long day at school, or that was the go-to thing, warm bread.
Yeah.
Right? And it was more like, not like, oh, I want to go get some bread. I did, but it's more like, oh man, this feels really nice.
Feeling of pleasantness. Yeah. No, I love that food has, it's more than just a utilitarian thing, right? Food is so central to different cultures. I grew up in mixed cultures as well. I come from, my dad is Dutch, my mom's from the Philippines, but I grew up in Indonesia. And in one of those, and every one of those cultures, like food is really what unites people. And I would say I fell down this rabbit hole of food research, besides the fact that I knew I was fascinated by food since a very young age. It was actually a paper written by Paul Rosen, which is, he's a very famous, I would say, food anthropologist.
Right.
And I read a paper in my bachelor's about the law of contagion. And it's the fact that, in many cultures, implicitly, it's understood that you take on the properties of the food that you eat. So, for example, they tell you, eat your vegetables or eat a particular vegetable because it'll make you grow taller or stronger or whatever. And those are implicitly also the properties of the food that you eat. Or, they, in some cultures, they tell you, like, stay away from eating specific foods because you don't want to get bad properties. Like for me anyways, like it's kind of a gross example, but growing up, like it was quite encouraged to eat like the brains of animals because they would make me smarter. You probably recognize that too.
Yeah, my mom has all kinds of things on this. Like, for sure. She's like, don't eat this. It'll cool your body down. I'm like, what does it mean cool? Like, what do you mean? Like temperature? Or like no, it doesn't make any sense. But like, they're like, I definitely have those experiences. Like, okay. I was like, one thought that I kept thinking about after like, I saw the project and saw your work, and I was like, our environment is different from, let's say, our ancestral, more like our, let's say, what's the way to like, I want to say
Paleolithic.
Paleolithic, that's the word, right? Okay. Our environment is different in a lot of ways. Like, for example, it's warm, like we have lights, but it seems to be very different, specifically in terms of the access we have to calories.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, I realized the other day, the density of like Albert Heijn, if you take Albert Heijn, and as a geographic location, the amount of calories per square meter, like that's like an anomaly in historic time, right?
Definitely.
Think about like where, at what time in history, as you're evolving, would you have found that many calories in one place that accessibly?
No, it's very unprecedented. And, there's a lot of debate about like what the ancestral human diet looked like, and that's why hypes like, right now. Hypes like the Paleolithic diet and stuff, I really don't believe in that, by the way, but that's how they kind of stemmed from. But I do think one thing that does come from the literature, and a lot of anthropologists and stuff agree on as well, is the element of seasonality. So seasonality was a major determinant of what types of foods were available, how long they were available. And I think generally, because you kind of have seasonality, you have, I would say ancestral food environments are characterized by periods of, how do you call it? Fluctuations in
like
feast and famine.
Exactly.
Exactly. That's what I was looking for. So in periods in which food was available, then you kind of were stimulated in order to be able to survive. Of course, periods to buffer periods of, I would say, famine. If food was available, you would have to eat it, and especially high calorie foods at that time are very valuable because of the fact that back then foraging was the only manner of acquiring food.
Right.
So you had to expend a lot of energy. Ancestral human. How do you call this? Ancestral humans.
Yeah, humans.
Yeah, they basically were characterized by environments of high metabolic output. So they were very physically active. They had to forage in order to get sufficient nutrition. So if they came across a potentially valuable high-calorie food, let's say like a fig tree, we hypothesize, and that's kind of the basis of the spatial memory bias work, is that it kind of conferred a survival advantage to those who remembered where this fig tree was located. Yeah. So, for example, that if the season was there in order to harvest the fruit, let's say, that they would be able to efficiently navigate back to that location and get those high-calorie resources.
What do we know about how, like, your early developmental environment affects your, like, do you know anything about, like, how how you grew up and what your early experience in life, how that impacts how the decisions you make with regards to food.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of great work. I'm not an expert in this, but I can, just from the top of my head, there's work showing, for example, in the Dutch hunger winter, in which in the Netherlands, it was already, there was a period of famine in the winter, and there was not a lot of food for a lot of people. They found that women who were pregnant during that period actually gave rise to epigenetic changes in their offspring, their kids. Yeah. That altered their metabolic state or the metabolic responses to specific foods. So right. I do think, early environments, prenatal environments and everything, that's very important for development. I'm not an expert on that though. But I definitely think through things like epigenetics, that could have an influence.
No, I have this, so I struggled with eating well and just maintaining my body weight properly for a long time. Yeah. And, I had to think about different strategies to help me do this. And what I realized was okay, the best thing for me to do is control the environment I'm in, where I'm living, my apartment, make sure I have certain things, I don't have certain things. Yeah. Let me know when I'm just gonna keep talking because you need to let me know when.
No. It was beeping. Okay. It's still fine.
And something weird is I don't know where I got this from, but I think it might have been from my mom, who's always hey, you gotta eat everything on your plate. Yeah. Right. And I don't know what it is, but I have this tendency where it's if it's there, on my plate, I gotta eat it. Yeah. I gotta finish it, right? Yeah. I don't leave anything behind. Also, there was a time when I was when I was really young, that we didn't have a lot. So it was you eat when you could eat, right? And when you had food to eat. So it's I don't know. So I had to find ways to shape my environment to do things. So now in my apartment, it's I have stuff that I eat every day. Yeah. And then I'm not the kind of person who can cook for the week and leave it in the fridge. Yeah. It's never gonna happen. I'll eat that in 2 days. It'll just disappear. So anyway, I'm very curious about this VR project and how you think it'll help people with their food behaviors in terms of what do you hope to help people do with this? Yeah,
so I guess it's what I said before. It's not really the ultimate aim is not to develop a product to sell or anything that. It's really just to validate this multisensory VR infrastructure for use and further research. Right. We're also very interested in using this technology to better understand the high calorie spatial memory bias. Mm-hmm. So the fact that people automatically or implicitly prioritize the locations of high-calorie foods versus low-calorie foods, even despite things like how much they like a food, how familiar they are with it, we even replicated this high-calorie spatial memory bias in different cultures.
Right. So the food you showed them was was it textually? How is it conveyed to them that this is a high calorie versus a low calorie?
Oh, it's just regular stuff that you would recognize, right? Okay. So high calorie foods would be potato chips and chocolate. Low calorie foods would be fruits and vegetables. Of course, people have to recognize it and be familiar that something is high or low calorie. Where was I going to go with this? Yeah, so we could, for example, simulate a supermarket where, different high and low calorie foods are distributed at different locations within the supermarket. And we can also see whether people would be more accurate at remembering where the high calorie foods were in the supermarket compared to the low calorie foods, with the addition of scent, obviously. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I'm quite fascinated about the evolutionary implications of this. Obviously, when you say it like this, it makes sense. Of course, you want to remember where you found the most calorie dense food at any given time, because it's such a scarce thing. I'm really interested about curious about how things that are so adaptive, behaviors that were so adaptive in a certain environment some time ago, all of a sudden are intensely maladaptive for many people.
Yeah. Right? And I think you bring up a really good point about this earlier on. It's really about the interaction between the individual, our biological evolutionary predispositions, however you want to call it, and the environment in which they operate. Because obviously this is a mechanism. It's maladaptive now in the current obesogenic food environment, but back then it was super adaptive, and therefore potentially that's why it got selected for throughout millennia
Yeah.
of evolution.
Yeah, I get it.
Of course, it's very difficult to prove that this is an evolutionary artifact. I think I don't even know how to begin proving that, but I do think we have enough empirical evidence to kind of rule out alternative, more like learning-based paradigms.
What you mentioned about seasonality is interesting. Like we have this
Feast and famine
behavior, right? And now one of the biggest problems, I would say, in terms of what kills you, what causes of mortality, I would say. So type 2 diabetes is like up there, and the pathway to type 2 diabetes is insulin resistance, right? Basically, for if you don't know, people who are listening, is like when you have a constant a side effect of having constant access to food is that you're constantly eating, and that means there's a constant level of glucose in your bloodstream, and your body is constantly releasing a certain level of insulin into your blood, and then your body gets insensitive over time to insulin, and then eventually you have to start taking insulin outside. And like you said, because if you don't have seasonality, like you can get blueberries and bananas, and also people are like, oh, that's healthy food. I don't know about this healthy, unhealthy thing. Kind of, it's ridiculous. Like you have to talk about specific things about, okay, like everything is eventually glucose. Like apples are glucose, like fruit, bananas are glucose. Like I don't care how you have them. Anyway, sorry, tangent. We didn't have seasonality anymore, right? You can always get bananas.
Yeah.
You can always get cookies. You can always get whatever it is you want from the thing, and you're constantly eating. And we don't and from an evolutionary perspective, the human body had to have, we wouldn't have survived if we couldn't have gone like a long period of time without eating anything. But to my friends, like who I do intermittent fasting, I've been doing it for a long time. For people who are like, so I usually I just eat once a day, and I've been doing it for a long time. It's been more than anything. The only reason I've been doing it is it helped me maintain my body, my physique. It's the only thing that worked for me, and it's awesome. But for people who I say like, yo, just skip 2 meals, they're like, no, like it's hard. Like I know people who have a visceral fear reaction to the idea that they have to not eat for a day.
Yeah.
Which is totally doable. It's not that hard. Right?
Yeah, I think one of the things that also came out from this work is that, there are huge differences between individuals when it comes to how they react towards certain food, or how they, their cognitions and behaviors in relation to eating. So indeed, like it could definitely work for you, but I definitely don't believe there's a one size fits all
for sure,
strategy. Yeah. And what we also see with regard to the bias is like, yes, the general trend across people, across cultures, is that people do have this sort of an automatic prioritization in their memory for high calorie versus low calorie food locations, but there are graded differences between people, right? So qualitatively, it's a yes scenario where people have the bias is present, it's expressed, right. But there are quantitative differences between people to the degree in which this bias is expressed. And we found that actually those with a greater expression of the bias, they also tend to have a higher BMI, which is a anthropometric marker for, I would say overconsumption. It's not a perfect marker for overconsumption. Obviously, it's heavily influenced by things like muscle mass.
Yeah, so technically I'm obese if I do a BMI score.
But I think on a population level, it's quite
it's
quite an accurate marker.
Yeah, no, like this is a good problem to have in some sense, right? Like we are in a situation where there's just plenty of food. We're not everywhere in the world.
Yes.
Obviously there are places in the world where this is not the case, which is not great, and that should be addressed. Yeah. But for more of the developed world, and increasingly more for more parts of the world over the years, as we progressively get better at producing food, this fact of like over. Also, I'm curious. Also, like, I've read stuff. I've seen a few studies where it's like, even if you just introduce a standard American diet, which is sad, right? To like people who like, even if like to just like, for example, Inuit population, they immediately start getting insulin resistance and
definitely diabetic. Yeah.
It's like, which is so it's such a like for something that for all the things that humans do every day in terms of a field that's studied, I feel like nutrition is just it's like I guess it's hard to run experiments, right? How do you run like long-term experiments on a
Oh, it's been done. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe it's also just my bubble, but I feel like there are really lots of great nutrition centers and institutes and lots of great research being done. So actually, on your point about like, yeah, if you put an Inuit population on an American diet, I think there was this study, I don't know when it was conducted, but I remember learning about it as a master's student when I was studying nutrition, where they actually followed, I think, people from Japan who migrated to America, and they followed them longitudinally, and they also did it, they followed longitudinally the opposite direction. So I would say Americans who I think moved to Japan, and they actually did find the resounding conclusion that the environment has such a big impact on your long-term trajectory, your dietary pattern, right? So I think it just boils down to the fact that you eat because you eat what is available, you eat what is around you, you eat what is considered normal, what is socially prescribed. There's also huge social norms involved in eating.
I mean, eating is such a social thing. Like like it's such a big part of all of our most important social interactions, like eating together.
And also food. Back then, like if you're talking about evolutionary pressures and selection pressures and stuff, food sharing was so integral to societies way back then, because that was also a form of survival. So it's so intrinsic, actually, sharing food. And
so environment is more than just the food around you, it's the people and
100%. You can talk about a social environment, so it's your peers, your colleagues, your home environment. It also differs at which life stage you're on. For example, adolescents, they tend to strive for autonomy, so their social networks would mostly be important for peers. But if you're younger, then the social network is mostly at home. But definitely the physical environment, your supermarkets, any places that you can find food and you make decisions about food, the gas station, the market.
What are some things that makes making good decisions? Okay, this is hard.
This is very
hard. Also, like people will be like, oh, what's a good food decision? But like, okay, let's just avoid the details. But like, what makes it hard for people to make like reasonable decisions? Like, say, not eat this versus that. Like, are there like things that are particularly difficult, that particularly make this a minefield to navigate for people?
Yeah, I think it's just that food choices, they're, for such a simple thing, they're driven by so many different factors. You're talking about multiple layers of different factors that feed into this one moment of food choice, right? So we mentioned some things like the physical food environment, the social food environment, things like price, the specific unique values you attach to things like health and price and all these different things, the context that you make the food decisions in. Is it a supermarket or is it a restaurant setting?
Like, are you hungry while you make the food decision?
Your nutritional state, 100%.
Like don't go to the supermarket while you're hungry. That's like, isn't that like standard advice to people? Is like, don't go in
and
there.
I think oftentimes when people talk about self-control issues, it's really the sort of prototypical example is, I know I shouldn't be eating that cookie, but I find it so difficult to beat that impulse, so I'm going to go eat that cookie. Yes, self-control failure can be because you fail to inhibit some sort of impulse or whatever. But oftentimes people also just consciously license themselves to that piece of cake or a cookie because they feel like they deserve it, or it's a reward for something. Right. And I think what's really fascinating about food choices is that people balance these values all the time, right? So when you're talking about health, price, taste, convenience, these are all important values that take place or are weighted to some degree in our food choices. But depending on who makes them and in which context somebody makes somebody from one time point to another, the weights attached to those different values can be very different. Right. Yeah, like so it's such a dynamic process, actually.
Yeah. Like if you're the value you attach to A versus B changes not just between people but temporally as you
100%.
As you go through the day. And as the day goes on, we know it's harder and harder to make decisions. Like you're more tired. Like at the end of the day, you go back. Like I find that at the end of the day, it's hard for me to say like I'm gonna make a reasonable food decision. Then like maybe
maybe because you feel like, hey, I'm gonna reward myself for a hard day of work. I'm gonna reward myself to a burger or some KFC. I don't know.
Man, I haven't had KFC in years, but I feel you.
Yeah.
but like so like for me, in terms of of course everything's like anecdotal, right? So I can't really make any general claims. I find willpower is a poor strategy in terms of trying to make sure I eat what I should eat. It's like I need to sort of pre-set up everything so that when it comes to the point where I have to make a decision, it's already insanely biased towards making the decision that I want than actually like saying, oh yeah, I'm
that's smart. You make it super
convenient
convenient to make the healthier decision.
Yeah.
I think that's it's a good strategy, but not everybody has the time and effort, I guess, or motivation to do that.
So like, remind me, like, how did you, like, why is this like a thing that you wanted, like, you decided to spend your life trying to understand?
So I think it's because it's always going to remain some sort of challenge. We're only really starting to scratch at the surface now about, I would say, the whole temporal dynamics, the spillovers of food choices, you know, and I think that's super fascinating just from a personal point of view. But I also feel very passionate about contributing in some way to a healthier future, and not to mention also more sustainable, because if you prevent overconsumption of calories, it's also more sustainable in the sense that you just have to produce less calories, right? You don't have to produce so many calories that's much more than what one individual needs to consume a day. So in a way, I think you can tackle both healthy and sustainable food choices quite well. Not always, it's not a 1-to-1 ratio, but you can tackle them quite nicely together. And food systems are definitely at a threat. You know, I think by the year 2050, we're going to really have issues feeding everybody on the planet. So this is a very relevant issue for me, and one that I feel really grateful that I can work on.
That's for sure. So looking ahead, what are some questions that you want to try and answer, like maybe like in the next few years? Because you're working on this VR thing now. You worked on this. You're doing a postdoc right now.
I'm doing my postdoc on digital nudges. So the more intervention side about, it's because the VR and stuff, the spatial memory, it's quite fundamental about why do we choose the foods that we eat. What are sort of the driver psychological processes underlying that. And then my postdoc project is really centered on the intervention side about how can we promote healthier food choices in an online setting. So we're working with a digital intervention called Nudges that we actually personalize based on people's characteristics. So for example, like I said, the values, so health versus price. If you're more health driven versus price driven, we can personalize nudges to highlight those aspects of a product. Whether you're more visually or verbally inclined as well. So if you prefer processing images over text, we can also personalize or tailor nudges based on those kind of characteristics to ease the processing of those messages.
That's interesting. Like, so whenever I'm in like Albert Heijn and I want to make a decision on what to buy, so I find that like asking the question, what do I want to eat right now, is usually like I find it very hard to answer. But if I ask myself, okay, what do I need to eat right now? Then it's like, and then it becomes easier, because then I think, okay, I need this. I need. I was like, usually it's like, okay, I just did a huge weight training session for like 2 hours, and I should probably get some carbs, get a decent amount of protein, and I don't need that much fat right now. Like because I don't want to spend all day trying to digest all that. So it's like, that makes it easier problem to solve. So like then the food is directed at solving a certain.
It's very utilitarian.
Solving a certain problem instead of like trying to satisfy a
more hedonic goal.
This nebulous thing of what do I want to eat right now?
What would make me feel good?
Exactly.
But then food choices, I think people are just more irrational in that sense, you know. So there's this whole idea of in behavioral economics that humans are, I forgot what the Latin word was, but do you know what I'm talking about? The Latin word for like
the whole like, are you talking about the Homo economicus or something?
Right, thank you. That was it. That you're able that we work basically like computers, where we're able to come up, like our outcomes are really a sum of its parts if we really break it down. But that is not what you see in practice, you know?
Absolutely.
So I doubt that such a weighted calculation would work for most people in all circumstances.
The individual difference is the killer here, right? Because like you're shaped not just by your environment, but your history, like your history, the kind of person you are, your personality, the things you like to eat, like what you've, all these different things.
Where every one of us is a walking mosaic of all of those components. And but I think the beautiful thing about which makes it on one hand very difficult to come up with a strategy that can fit all, but I think the beautiful point of it is this whole health prevention paradox, right? It's that if you just tackle it on a population level, smaller changes, just small changes on each individual level can amount to really fantastic, significant impacts on the greater level. And I think that that's what we can realistically aim for.
Right.
So nudges, for example, we do see, a lot of meta-analysis and stuff that their effect sizes tend to be quite small. So they're very helpful, but, the degree to which they actually help you make healthier food choices might be smaller than, I don't know, like Ozempic, which is going to drop down your weight like crazy.
I don't know what that is.
Yeah, just like, let's say a medical drug, or that suppresses your appetite or whatever. Yeah. But on a population level, nudges do what they're exactly what they're supposed to do, which is create an environment in which people are autonomously able to make healthier decisions sustainably at a smaller scale, but over a long period of time, that would amount to a great impact.
I gotta admit, like I hate nudges. I hate the idea of like of course your entire environment is a nudge. Like everything is sort of built.
There is a choice architecture.
Yeah, there's a choice architecture. Like the way buildings built, the way your supermarket is arranged, the way the roads are built. Everything's a nudge. Everything pushes you in certain directions. But I score on like the 95th percentile in disagreeableness. So like, I don't know, something about it annoys me. Like the idea that someone's like wants me to this is so ridiculous. But like on the stairs on Dante, they're like
the calorie thing.
I'm like, I get so mad. I'm like, no. Yeah. Like one time I was like, no, I'm gonna take the lift just to spite this. Like just.
No, I love that. Because I also take that. I want to investigate that mechanism. This whole idea of reactance, right? And reactance actually stems from individual differences and their need for autonomy and their need to feel like they can determine things themselves. It's all postulates of self-determination theory. Yeah. But even like I can kind of assure you that in studies in which they actually explicitly measure like a nudge's acceptance, even if you stratify the population based on things like need for autonomy, I think oftentimes nudges score poorly when people don't experience it themselves. So they actually base it on their expectations of what a nudge does. Mm-hmm. But in studies in which somebody actually does experience a nudge, they don't feel like their autonomy to make such decisions is threatened in any way. And the whole premise of a nudge is that you can easily opt out of it as much as you can accept it. It shouldn't limit your freedom of decision making in any way. It's not otherwise it doesn't classify itself as a nudge. Okay. And nudges don't work if your preferences are against it. So I don't think you have to worry about that.
No, this is just my I'm just nuts. But like don't.
No, but I like it because this kind of follows like what I've been reading up on theory as well when it comes to nudges and autonomy. Yeah.
All right. Well, I think this is 45 minutes. Isn't that what you said? Yeah, that's good. I'm not going to take up much more of your time because this has been great.
Yeah.
Anyway, like, thank you for joining me on this. Like, this is something I'm very curious about because, like, I've been an athlete for a long time, and I've struggled with this for a long time. And I know people who struggle with this for a long time. And definitely, like, understanding how our environment affects our food choices, I think, is really, really important. So that's great.
Yeah, and also like it can seem almost like a doomsday story when you say like, oh, this bias exists and we're just wired to make bad food choices. And it's completely not the case. I also want to emphasize the point that we do have ultimate control in a way, like self-control, all of these things to protect ourselves from making bad choices. All of those things are trainable. We can learn to become better at them.
Yeah, of course.
But I'm 100% also an advocate of making the environment, changing it so that it's not such a war field to make the healthy choices. So I think that the responsibility lies not only on the individual, but the bigger system.
Nice. That's, I think, a great way to wrap this up. And someone's at the door, so perfect. All right. Thanks. Thanks again. Okay. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
This has been a One Deeper podcast. Thanks for joining, and I hope you learned something. Catch you again next time.